Well, I like that. We should do that every day. I think we're going to have some fun here. Welcome back to Open Exchange, and we're dedicating much of our programming today to look at the so-called sin stocks. And on Open Exchange, we'll be looking at cigarettes, in particular the regulatory environment, and how new regulations in South Africa could affect tobacco companies specifically. We might touch on a couple of the other sin industries too, by way of a preview of the day. Joining me in the studio for a look at that is Francois van der Merwe, who is CEO of the Tobacco Institute of Southern Africa, Chris Hart, who is Chief Strategist at Investment Solutions, and Louw, Executive Director from the Free Market Foundation. Francois, let's start with you. It's an interesting industry, cigarettes. Many people smoke. Many people have smoked at some time in their lives, and their brands are regarded as their friends for those who are enthusiastic smokers. But it's an industry that's been under health pressure, if you like, for 50 years, 60 years. The US Surgeon General in the 1950s determined that smoking is dangerous for your health, and they started with the warnings. And of course, ever since, increasingly, you're not allowed to smoke in certain places, more warnings on the boxes and so on. Yet the demand grows. Give us a picture of cigarettes in the world at the moment and in South Africa.
David, thank you very much. Indeed, a massive industry worldwide, making massive contributions economically, job-wise, paying duties and all of that. And with great brands, some of the best brands in the world. Huge demand for the product, very stable. There's 1.3 billion smokers in the world at the moment, and even the World Health Organization predicts that that will grow to 1.5 billion by the year 2030. Yeah. We all realize and accept that the products are harmful to people's health and therefore needs to be regulated, and we from the industry support that. Yeah. However, what we have seen is the way they go about it impacts on the industry, and the way they want to go about it is by driving higher and higher taxes and driving extreme regulation. We don't mind regulation, but it's extreme regulation that comes with the problems, and that strangles the legal industry, because what you find is that the legal industry will always comply with regulation in terms of pack warnings, tar nicotine readings, regulations around everything, paying taxes and all of that. But what extreme regulation and extreme taxation have done over years, it has created a parallel industry, a black market, an illicit industry. Today already 10% of the global market is illicit, and that strangles the legal industry, because those volumes should have been sold by the legal industry paying more taxes. In South Africa, 29% of the market is illicit at this stage. Yeah.
So it becomes counterproductive is the argument.
It becomes counterproductive.
Well, I also think there's a problem, is that the illicit industry is effectively, and versus the legal industry, you've got an issue of effectively an anti-competitive behavior, where effectively competition is limited to what we call the legitimate industry. Because of the way things are structured, it doesn't allow entry or exit into the industry. In other words, the market doesn't work properly. And the problem with higher penalties, especially when you've got corrupt environments, it creates opportunities for greater salary supplement opportunities, can I put it that way, the bribery side of it. And you're creating, how could you say, offences, criminal and that sort of thing, which are artificial. In other words, it's purely because of taxes and that kind of thing. Just think of even the gambling industry, how online gambling is attacked. Why? Because we can't tax it, but it's a recreational thing. It's a personal choice. It's my money, etc. If I want to gamble online, why
Chris,
can I not do it?
Stop you there, and we're going to come back to the impact for investors of this industry. So it's an industry that's growing. It's popular. 1.something billion smokers in the world. It damages people. We've known that. There's no contestation about that. Leon, we know it damages people. Should the government be doing what it's doing to stop people smoking virtually anywhere, apart from their own garden near the bottom? You're not allowed to smoke in your car, if you're not allowed to smoke near children. And the health case for this is strong. Should government be regulating this?
Well, the health case for many things is strong. You'll see that the government is now wanting to regulate the amount of salt that's permitted in food, the amount of sugar, the use of refined products, junk food advertisements and sales. In some countries, they don't allow you to sell sweets to fat children, and cold drinks bigger than a certain size, regardless of whether you're a giant or whether you're a 3-year-old. And so the point is, you need to understand this is not about tobacco. It is not even about health. It is about puritanical control of lifestyle. And it doesn't stop with tobacco. That happens to be the cutting edge, because there's some nice graphics you can show of diseased lungs and lips and teeth strength and so on. But this isn't the thin edge of the wedge. This is the thick edge of the wedge. And we're way beyond anything that is reasonable for government to do by way of intrusion in personal lifestyle choices. And once you accept that the government can tell you how to live your life, you need to understand you're going to make flossing permanent, you're going to obligatory, obesity will be banned. And this morning the Department of Health issued the statistics on the greatest sources of death in South Africa. The single biggest one is AIDS. Well, why don't we make unsafe sex illegal? That will come. You need to understand, once you allow the nanny state, once you allow Big Brother to become the puritanical dictator, there is no stopping it. And the anti-tobacco fanatics, by the way, are actually puritanical fanatics. They will stop at nothing. So it's not about whether you protect your health, it's about personal lifestyle freedom of choice.
Okay, I sense that Francois is not going to disagree with you there. He would like people to have choice. Chris, let's talk about the risks, two kinds of risks here. The one is people who invest, and you know, when I talk to the analysts in the studio, you say, what about BAT? You know, and they say, well, we know it hurts people, but you know, there's a bit of an ethical issue. But, and then the other thing is the risks that we're talking about here. In other words, not risks to health, but risks to the investment case because of higher taxes all the time and the increasing black market.
Well, I think the right terminology or an alternative technology is not sin stocks or sin taxes or sin activities, but fun activities, because people drink, they smoke, etc. They gamble for recreational purposes, and we know at the edge there are exceptions to this: problem gamblers, problem smokers, problem drinkers, etc. But largely most people drink, smoke, gamble, etc. For recreational purposes. And what this intrusion is doing is it's raising the cost of doing business. Instead of raising the education awareness of not landing up in the fringe of too much drinking, etc., or at least protecting people from the consequences of other people's bad behavior or poor personal choices.
I'm going to go to Francois now.
But the investment case is still strong. And why I'm saying
the growth keeps happening.
Why I'm saying it's because it's part of the recreation. We live very highly pressurized lifestyles, and people look for recreation outlets. Now, for the poor, cigarette smoking is probably one of their very few and sometimes only pleasures. And that's an interesting one, because you're raising the cost of doing so. Is not going to stop people doing so, but it actually then basically improves the channels for the illicit industry.
Because I'm going to have to stop you there.
But it embeds crime in their communities as well.
I want Francois' point there. In Australia, there's talk now that you have to sell cigarettes in brown paper packets rather than with those famous brands that we all get to know. There's a paradox here, isn't there? Is that it's like if you have a big company like SAB Miller in terms of alcohol, if you ban alcohol advertising, that makes it impossible for any new entrant to come into the market. So you reduce competition and you entrench the present player. Now, how serious a threat is that packaging thing? Because cigarettes, let's face it, are brands. You know, people identify with the brands. They don't identify with the piece of rolled paper with the tobacco in it. They like the taste or need the taste because they're addicts, but they love the brands. What if you remove the brands? Doesn't that bring a big risk for the industry?
Yes, David, of course it brings a risk, but you know, the packaging thing is one thing, but regulation, extreme regulation in general terms is a problem here. And you get the impression that the health ministries and the World Health Organization is starting to panic, because over time, total consumption is not really declining, as they have thought would be the case. But by driving these things, as I've said, you see the growth of a huge illicit trade. And in South Africa, we have almost 30% of the market. And those products, because they don't comply, because duties are not paid, are put on the market for cheap. It actually stimulates consumption. Children and poor people can buy cigarettes for 10 Rand and less a packet.
Yes, and if they're pirated products, by definition, they're not controlled in outlets necessarily. They go by the back route. I'll come to Chris in a moment for BAT, because we're running out of time. But Leon, just if you were going to say something, then I'll ask you about BAT.
Yes, on this issue of stocks and investments and so on, we must understand that in South Africa, if there's any country in the world that should not fall for this anti-fun or pleasure or lifestyle propaganda, propaganda, which is what it is, including many, many extreme lies, blatant lies. But that aside, let's understand what we're talking about here. We're talking about agriculture that produces junk food, that produces tobacco, produces alcohol. The government used to run KWV, one of the world's prestige liquor producers. Agriculture, imports, jobs. The mining sector, open cast mining, producing carbon emissions, whatever. South Africa is built on these stocks. These are the prestige companies of South Africa that have gone international, the Rembrandt Group, the SAB Group, the mining companies. So if we come out against so-called sin industry, we are coming actually out against South Africa. It's that serious.
I think there's been too much agreement on this panel, some disagreement, but just a really quick word, Chris, on BAT as an investment case.
Yeah, basically you ban packaging and you strengthen the hand of the illicit industry, etc. BAT may well have to become involved in the illicit industry as a survival.
It may have to become a pirate itself.